The snowflakes had stopped falling gently an hour ago. Now they attacked, biting into exposed skin as the blizzard consumed Huntsville, Alabama, in a way no one had seen in 50 years. Anna's hands were blue, shaking so violently she couldn't keep her grip on the cardboard box she'd been using to shield her youngest from the wind. "Mama," Thomas whispered, her 7-year-old voice barely audible over the howling wind. "I can't feel my feet." Anna pulled her daughter closer, but she had nothing left to give. No warmth, no shelter, no hope. The other 3 children, Michael at 10, Sarah at 8, and little Danny, just 4 years old, pressed against her like they were trying to disappear into her body. Danny had stopped crying an hour ago, which terrified her more than his tears ever had. Her feet were numb. She couldn't feel the ground anymore, couldn't tell if she was even walking straight. 3 shelters had turned them away, full capacity. The churches were locked, the library had closed early, every door she'd knocked on had remained shut, faces peering through windows before curtains quickly closed. Nobody wanted a desperate widow and her 4 half-frozen children on a night like this. Then, through the wall of white, she saw it. The glow of lights from Romano's restaurant, warm and golden. Anna didn't know it was a restaurant. She only knew that where there was light, there might be mercy. She stumbled toward it, her children clinging to her coat. Thomas walked beside her, trying to help carry Danny even though her own small body was trembling. 10 steps, 20, each one feeling like it might be her last. The heavy oak door was right there. Anna threw her weight against it, desperation giving her strength she didn't know she still had. The door flew open, and 20 pairs of eyes turned. The room fell silent except for the crackling fireplace and the storm's muffled roar outside. The warm air hit Anna like a physical force, so overwhelming after hours in the cold that she almost collapsed right there in the doorway. She didn't see the expensive suits, or the crystal chandeliers, or the bottles of wine on white tablecloths. She didn't see the bodyguards positioned around the room, their hands moving instinctively toward concealed weapons. She only saw the man at the center table, a man whose presence commanded the room without a single word. A man who sat perfectly still while everyone else shifted uncomfortably. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his reputation. She didn't know that she had just stumbled into the private dinner of Gaucho Roberto, or that men crossed the street to avoid making eye contact with him. She only knew that he looked like someone who could say yes when everyone else had said no. It's a Tuesday evening in Huntsville, Alabama, January 1987. The blizzard had started 3 hours earlier, transforming the city into a frozen ghost town. Every business had closed early, every family had retreated to the safety of their homes. But Romano's restaurant remained open, not for customers, for him. Romano's wasn't just any restaurant. The mahogany-paneled walls had witnessed deals that would never see daylight. Every waiter knew to keep their eyes down when he dined. Every cop in Huntsville knew better than to ask questions about what happened behind those velvet curtains. The crystal chandeliers cast warm light across 20 men, seated at various tables, business associates, enforcers, the inner circle. They ate the finest Italian food in Alabama, drank wine that cost more per bottle than most families earned in a week, and spoke in the careful language of men who understood that words had consequences. Gaucho Roberto sat at his usual corner table. At 53, he had built an empire that stretched from Mobile to Memphis. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back despite the chaos outside. His tailored suit, charcoal gray, Italian wool, fit him perfectly. His scarred hands rested calmly on the white tablecloth, one finger slowly rotating his wine glass. His dark eyes missed nothing. They cataloged every entrance, every exit, every potential threat before it materialized. They noticed when Giuseppe, the head waiter, shifted his weight. They registered when Marco's laugh was a half-second too loud. They tracked Vincenti, his right-hand man, as he moved through the room. Men twice his size would cross the street rather than make eye contact with him. District attorneys had tried and failed to build cases against him for 20 years. Witnesses developed sudden amnesia. Evidence mysteriously disappeared. Tonight, like every Tuesday, he was conducting business. The shipment arrives Thursday, Vincenti said quietly, leaning close. Mobile docks, midnight. Gaucho nodded once. Vincenti understood. That single nod contained more instruction than most men could convey in an hour. This was how Gaucho operated. Methodically, ruthlessly, without sentiment. Every decision was calculated. Every risk was measured. Every relationship was transactional. Business was business. He had survived 4 decades in this world because he understood one fundamental truth. Emotion is weakness. Those walls around his heart were built with blood and reinforced with betrayal. Nothing got through. Not anymore. He'd seen men destroyed by love, watched empires crumble because someone cared too much about the wrong person. Gaucho Roberto would never make that mistake again. He took a sip of his wine, a 1961 Barolo, smooth as silk, and allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. His empire was secure. His enemies were either dead or terrified. His future was as certain as anything could be in this world. Outside, the blizzard raged. Inside, he was warm, powerful, untouchable, until that door flew open. The front door exploded inward on a gust of wind so violent, it extinguished 3 candles and sent napkins swirling. The sudden blast of Arctic air cut through the room. Every head turned. Conversations died. Bodyguards' hands instinctively moved toward concealed weapons. A woman stood in the doorway, backlit by the swirling white chaos outside. Her thin coat was plastered to her body, her dark hair matted with ice and snow. Her silhouette swayed, unsteady. But it wasn't the woman that made the room hold its breath. It was the children. 4 of them, ranging from maybe 4 years old to 10, clustered around her. Their faces were ghost pale, lips tinged blue, eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from understanding you might actually die. The smallest one, a boy who couldn't have been more than 4, was being carried by the oldest, a girl of about 10. He wasn't crying anymore, just staring with empty eyes, silent, too silent. She looked like she'd been at war. Her cheek was bruised, weeks old but still visible. Her hands were raw and cracked from harsh work. Her dress was more patches than original fabric, completely inadequate for a night like this. Snow melted on the floor around her, creating small puddles that reflected the chandelier light. Her eyes swept the room, searching, not for judgment, not for pity, for something else. Power, authority, someone who could say yes when the whole world had said no. Her gaze landed on Gaucho Roberto. The recognition was instant, primal. Maybe it was the way he sat, like gravity itself bent around him. Maybe it was the stillness in him while everyone else shifted nervously. Maybe it was the way every other man in the room seemed to orbit around him. Without hesitation, Anna took a step forward, then another. Her children moved with her like a single organism. The room held its breath. 20 men watched in stunned silence. You didn't just walk up to Gaucho Roberto. You were summoned. You were granted an audience. You certainly didn't stumble in from a blizzard and make a beeline straight for him. Vincent started to rise, his hand inside his jacket. His eyes flicked to Gaucho, waiting for the signal. But Gaucho didn't give the signal. He sat perfectly still, his dark eyes fixed on this woman and her frozen children, something unreadable across his face. Anna reached his table. For a moment, she just stood there, swaying. Then her legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees in front of his table. Her children immediately knelt with her, clustering close, seeking what little warmth her body still had to offer. Her voice, when it came, was breaking. "Please, sir, please. I don't need money. I don't need food. I just need somewhere warm. Just tonight. Just until the storm passes. My babies, they're so cold. I can see their lips turning blue, and I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know where else to go. Every shelter is full. Every church locked their doors. Please, I'm begging you, just somewhere warm." Thomas, the 7-year-old girl, stepped forward on unsteady legs. Her small hand trembled as she reached toward Gaucho, pressing something into his palm, a tiny, hand-drawn picture on a piece of cardboard. A family. 5 stick figures under a crooked roof with a yellow sun above it. The colors were faded, the edges soft from being carried and treasured. "That's us," Thomas whispered, "when Daddy was still alive. Before the fire. Before everything got cold." The silence that followed was absolute. Gaucho Roberto hadn't always been the man that made killers nervous. 32 years earlier, in the winter of 1955, he had been Roberto Hernandez, a young father with calloused hands from honest work and dreams bigger than his paycheck. He'd worked the docks in Mobile, loading ships 16 hours a day, coming home exhausted but smiling because he was building something, a future, a family. He'd had everything that mattered: Maria, his wife with eyes like honey and a laugh that could melt ice; little Isabella, only 5 years old, who called him Papi and believed he could fix anything in the world. They'd lived in a tiny apartment on the 3rd floor of a run-down building, but it was home. Every night, no matter how tired, he'd carry Isabella on his shoulders and tell her stories about the places those ships were going: Paris, Tokyo, Rio de Janeiro, places they'd never see, but could dream about together. Maria would laugh and shake her head, but her eyes would shine. They had dreams of saving enough for a house, just a small one, with a yard where Isabella could play. Roberto kept their savings in a coffee can behind the stove. Every week, he'd add a few more dollars. It was slow. It would take years, but they had time. Or so he thought. Those dreams were shattered on a Tuesday night in February. Roberto had stayed late at the docks, trying to earn extra for the house fund. When he got home at midnight, he found his apartment building consumed by flames. The fire was already raging, 3rd floor fully engulfed. Fire trucks were already there, but it was too late. The water pressure was too weak, the building too old, the fire too hot, too fast. The landlord, a man named Marcus Delacroix, had known about the faulty wiring for months, had been cited twice by the city inspector, had promised to fix it, had pocketed the repair money instead and spent it on a new Cadillac that sat gleaming in his driveway while families slept beneath wiring that sparked and smoked. Roberto didn't think, didn't hesitate. He ran into that building. Firefighters tried to stop him, but he was already through the door, already taking the stairs 3 at a time, already screaming their names. 3rd floor. His floor. The hallway was black with smoke. He'd kicked down his own door and found them in the bedroom overcome by smoke. Maria's arms were wrapped around Isabella, trying to protect her to the very end. He'd carried them both out, one in each arm. He'd stumbled down the stairs, his own lungs burning. He'd screamed for help, begged God, begged the universe. But they were already gone. The official investigation called it an accident. Marcus Delacroix paid a small fine, $500. The insurance claim got denied on a technicality. Roberto was left with nothing but a bill for the ambulance that had arrived too late and 2 graves he couldn't afford to dig. From that night forward, Roberto Hernandez died in that fire too. What emerged from the ashes was Gaucho Roberto. Something shifted in Gaucho's chest, something he hadn't felt in 3 decades, something that terrified him more than any gun ever had. He looked at Thomas, really looked at her, the way her small hand gripped her mother's coat with white knuckles, the way she stood between her younger siblings and the door, trying to shield them despite being just as frozen herself, the way her chin was lifted just slightly, that fierce, desperate courage that said she'd fight the whole world if it meant protecting her family. Isabella used to stand exactly like that when she was scared but trying to be brave. The drawing felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in his hand. 5 stick figures, a family, before everything turned cold. He'd drawn pictures like this once, him and Isabella at the kitchen table while Maria cooked dinner. How long? His voice came out rougher than intended, scraping against his throat. The room seemed to lean in, shocked to hear him address this woman at all. Anna's voice shook, her teeth chattering. My husband died 14 months ago. House fire. We lost everything. I've been working 3 jobs, but it's never enough. The rent keeps going up, food keeps getting more expensive. This week I had to choose between paying the electric bill or keeping the apartment. I paid the electric. Then the landlord evicted us yesterday for being late on rent. We've been trying to stay at shelters, but with the storm... She stopped, unable to continue. You said there was a fire? Gaucho's jaw tightened, his fingers pressed against the cardboard drawing. Yes, faulty space heater. My husband, David, he'd complained about it for weeks, told the landlord it was smoking. The landlord kept saying he'd fix it, kept saying next week. David even offered to pay for a new one himself, but the landlord said no, said it was against the lease. Anna's voice was breaking now. My husband went to work that morning and never came home. The heater caught fire while he was gone. I got the children out, but David, he ran back inside, thought I was still in there. She couldn't finish. The investigation called it an accident. Nobody was held responsible. I was left with the funeral bills and 4 babies and no way to pay for any of it. The parallel was perfect. Landlord negligence, faulty equipment, warnings ignored, a fire that stole everything, an investigation that called it an accident, a woman left alone with nothing but grief and children and bills she couldn't pay. It was his story, 32 years later, playing out again in front of his eyes. Gaucho looked at the drawing still in his hand, 5 stick figures. The father was taller than the others, one arm stretched up toward the sun like he was trying to grab it and bring it down for his family. Vincent was watching his boss with an expression of pure shock. In 20 years of working for Gaucho, he'd never seen this, never seen that expression cross the boss's face, the mask slipping, something raw and wounded visible underneath. You have nowhere to go. Gaucho said it as a statement, not a question. No, sir. I tried everything. Everywhere. We've been walking for 3 hours in this storm. The children they won't survive the night out there. I know that. So I saw your light and I now looked up at him with eyes that held no hope left, only desperate honesty. I'm not asking for much. Just warmth. Just tonight. Just a chance for them to wake up tomorrow. The smallest boy, Danny, the 4-year-old, chose that moment to collapse. Just a small crumple, his little legs giving out. Anna caught him, but she was shaking so hard she could barely hold him. For the first time in 30 years, Gaucho Roberto felt those walls crack. He stood slowly. The entire room tensed. Anna pulled her children closer, preparing for rejection. But Gaucho didn't head for the door. He removed his jacket, a $3,000 charcoal wool coat, and wrapped it around Danny. The child's tiny body disappeared into the expensive fabric, but the warmth was immediate. Then Gaucho knelt down, his expensive pants touching the wet floor, until he was eye level with Thomas. His voice, when it came, was gentler than anyone in that room had heard in decades. What's your name, little one? Thomas, she whispered. Thomas, that's a strong name, a brave name. He looked up at Anna, and something in his expression had changed completely. Your children will be warm tonight. You have my word. Then he stood and his voice changed, became the voice that commanded empires. Vincent. Vincent snapped to attention. Boss. I want to. Roberto removed his jacket, a $3,000 charcoal wool coat, and wrapped it around Danny. He looked at Thomas again. Your father would want you safe and warm. Tonight you will be, and every night after. The transformation happened in 12 minutes. Vincent had Anna and the children in a black SUV with heated seats within 5 minutes. The Riverside property, a sprawling mansion that Gaucho used for out-of-town associates, was 17 minutes away on a normal night, but Vincent made it in 12. Dr. Patterson was already pulling up when they arrived, his medical bag in hand, not asking questions. When Gaucho Roberto called at midnight during a blizzard, you came. The house was blazing with warmth, every fireplace lit, blankets piled on every surface. Meanwhile, Gaucho made more calls. His voice was clipped, efficient. Antonio, I need a full background check. Anna Morrison. Husband was David Morrison. David Allen Morrison. Find out everything about the fire. Who owned the building? Who did the investigation? Who closed the case? I want names. I want addresses. I want everything. He paused. And Antonio? I want it by tomorrow morning. He made another call. Sarah, I need you to set up accounts. Education funds for 4 children, ages 4, 7, 8, and 10. Health insurance, dental, vision, everything a family needs. Pull from my personal accounts, not business. This is personal. How much for each fund, Mr. Roberto? Enough to get them through college. Full ride, any school they want. He paused. Make it generous. Make it bulletproof. Anna watched this unfold from the couch where Dr. Patterson was checking the children's vital signs, taking temperatures, listening to lungs, checking fingers and toes for frostbite. Thomas had fallen asleep, wrapped in 3 blankets, finally warm for the first time in days. Minor hypothermia, Dr. Patterson said quietly. Another hour and we'd be looking at serious damage, maybe permanent. You got them here just in time. Anna's hands shook as she held her own cup of hot chocolate. Just in time. Just barely. She'd been minutes away from watching her children die. Why? Anna finally asked, looking at Gaucho who stood by the fireplace. Why are you doing this? You don't know us. Gaucho looked at her for a long moment. Because 32 years ago, I watched my wife and daughter die in a fire caused by negligence. A landlord who pocketed repair money, an inspector who looked the other way, a system that called it an accident and moved on. His voice was quiet, but sharp, and I've spent 3 decades making sure I never felt that helpless again. But tonight, I realized something. Power isn't just about never being hurt again. It's about being the help that never came. He looked at the children sleeping peacefully. Your husband, did he try to fix things before the fire? Anna's eyes filled with tears. Every single week. He complained about the heater every week, showed the landlord the sparking, the smoking. The landlord kept promising, kept saying next week. David even offered to pay for the repairs himself. Money we didn't have. But the landlord said it was against the lease, said we'd be evicted if we touched anything. And then, she couldn't finish. What's the landlord's name? Richard Kosloff, but what can you... Don't worry about what I can do. Gaucho's voice went cold. You just focus on your children, getting them healthy, getting them strong again. Let me handle Mr. Kosloff. The next 72 hours unfolded with precision. Day 1, Antonio delivered the full report at 6 a.m., his eyes red from working through the night. Richard Kosloff owned 17 properties in Huntsville, all of them barely code compliant. 6 previous complaints about safety issues filed with the city, 3 previous fires, one of them fatal, a grandmother who died in her sleep 2 years ago. Every investigation closed with minimal fines that Kosloff paid without blinking. Kosloff had connections with the city inspector, a man named Gerald Webb, who'd been accepting bribes for 12 years. The bank records showed regular deposits of $500, sometimes $1,000, always in cash, always the day after an inspection.
Webb had signed off on properties that should have been condemned. Gaucho read the report in silence, his jaw tightening with each page. When he finished, he closed the folder with careful precision. Good work. Now find me everything on Gerald Webb, everyone he's connected to, every official who's looked the other way. I want the whole network. Day 2. Richard Kosloff received visitors. Not the kind that make threats, the kind that deliver folders. Thick folders containing every code violation, every bribe, every corner cut. Photographs of the families living in conditions that violated housing laws. Children sleeping in rooms with exposed wiring, elderly couples in apartments with broken heat, single mothers in buildings with mold. Bank records showing where the repair money actually went, into Kosloff's offshore accounts, a cabin in the Smokies, a boat in Florida, a mistress in Birmingham who thought he was a successful businessman.
And a message typed on plain paper. You have 48 hours to make this right. Every family, every building, every violation fixed, or these documents go to the FBI, the IRS, and the Huntsville Times. Kosloff laughed when he read it, called his lawyer, a slick operator named Mitchell who'd gotten him out of trouble a dozen times before. Said he had connections that went to the state capitol, said he had judges in his pocket and politicians who owed him favors. Let them try, Kosloff told Mitchell over bourbon. I've been doing this for 20 years. Nobody touches me. He stopped laughing when his lawyer was disbarred the next morning for ethics violations that had been sitting in a file somewhere. Bribing a court clerk, tampering with evidence, witness intimidation. He stopped laughing when his bank accounts were suddenly frozen for suspicious activity. When the IRS showed up with questions about his tax returns, when the city inspector who'd been protecting him, Gerald Webb, resigned suddenly, citing personal reasons, his resignation letter leaked to the press along with bank statements. Day 3, Kosloff called the number on the card that had been left with the folder. His hands shook as he dialed. What do you want? Justice. Gaucho's voice was calm. You're going to sell every property you own to a non-profit housing organization I've arranged, Huntsville Hope Housing. They actually fix things when they break. You're going to sell at cost, not market value. You're going to use the profits to establish a fund for the families you've harmed, including a full settlement to Anna Morrison, $200,000. And you're going to leave Alabama and never return. And if I refuse? Then these documents get released. Every news outlet in Alabama, every federal agency that might be interested, and you'll spend the next decade in federal prison. Your choice, but choose quickly. Kosloff chose correctly. Signed the papers that afternoon. By the end of the week, he was gone. Rumor said he was selling used cars in Nevada. Meanwhile, Anna and her children stayed at the Riverside house. Gaucho visited every evening, never staying long, never intrusive, just checking in, making sure they had everything they needed, watching Thomas slowly come back to life as warmth and safety replaced fear and cold. On the third night, Thomas approached him with a new drawing. This time it was 6 stick figures, the 5 from before, plus one more, a tall figure with dark hair standing beside them, one hand on the mother's shoulder, protective. That's you, Thomas said simply. You're part of our family now. Something in Gaucho's chest, something he'd thought died in 1955, stirred back to life. Gerald Webb wasn't as easy to handle as Kosloff. He was protected by a network of equally corrupt officials, all of them feeding at the same trough. So Gaucho took down the entire network. He arranged a meeting at a warehouse on the outskirts of town. Webb arrived with 2 bodyguards, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. The warehouse was cold, empty except for a single table with files stacked nicely.
Gaucho sat calmly, Vincent standing behind him. "Mr. Webb, thank you for coming. Let's skip the pleasantries. What do you want?" "I want to understand something." Gaucho opened the first folder. David Morrison filed 17 complaints about the faulty heater in his apartment. 17. You personally inspected the property 3 times, signed off on it every time. Why? "I don't have to answer." $500. Gaucho said it quietly. "That's what Kozlov paid you per inspection. $500 to sign off on conditions that killed a man and nearly killed his family. I'm trying to understand the math. Is that what a human life is worth to you?" Webb's face flushed. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I have your bank records. I have emails. I have testimony from 6 other landlords who paid you similar amounts. I have enough evidence to end your career and send you to prison." Gaucho leaned forward. "But I'm going to give you a choice." He pushed a piece of paper across the table. "Resignation letter, effective immediately. You'll also provide a full written confession about your role in David Morrison's death and every other violation you ignored. You'll cooperate fully with the state ethics investigation that's about to begin." "And if I refuse?"
Then these files go to every news outlet in Alabama. Your face will be on every TV screen. Your name will be synonymous with corruption. And when you inevitably go to trial, you'll discover that prisons are very unpleasant places for men who let families die. Gaucho stood. "You have until morning." Webb signed the confession that night. Within 2 weeks, 7 other officials were under investigation. The entire network of corruption that have allowed landlords like Kozlov to operate with impunity was collapsing, and David Morrison's death, which had been closed as an unfortunate accident, was reclassified: wrongful death, criminal negligence. Justice, served cold, but thoroughly. 3 months later, Anna and her children moved into a modest house in a good neighborhood. Not the Riverside mansion, that had never been meant to be permanent, but a real home. 3 bedrooms, a small yard where the children could play, a kitchen where Anna could cook without worrying about faulty appliances. The house was paid for. The education funds were established. The health insurance was comprehensive. Anna had a job, legitimate, well-paying, with regular hours, at a company that happened to need someone with her skills and work ethic. A company that happened to have connections to Gaucho's legitimate business interests. She never asked how it all came together. She'd learned not to question miracles. Gaucho visited once a month, always on a Sunday afternoon, always bringing something small: books for the children, flowers for Anna, once a baseball glove for Michael, who'd mentioned he wanted to try out for Little League. He never stayed long, an hour, maybe 2. But in that time, he was different. The walls came down. He laughed at Thomas's jokes. He helped Danny with his homework. He listened to Sarah's stories about school. He taught Michael how to throw a curveball. On one of these visits, 6 months after that blizzard night, Thomas showed him another drawing. This one was different, more detailed, more carefully done. 6 people standing in front of a house. A real house, not stick figures. The sun was shining. Everyone was smiling. "That's our house," Thomas said proudly. "The one you got us. And that's you, because you're family now." Anna looked up from where she was pouring coffee. "She's right, you know. You saved our lives. All of us. Not just that night. Every day since." Gaucho held the drawing carefully. "I didn't save anyone. I did what should have been done 32 years ago, what someone should have done for my family. And that makes it count even more," Anna said quietly. "You turned your pain into someone else's salvation. That's not just power, that's grace." He looked at her, this woman who'd stumbled into his restaurant on the worst night of her life, and somehow cracked open something he'd thought was sealed forever. "I spent 30 decades building walls, making sure I'd never feel that helpless again.
never care about anything enough for it to hurt. And now? He looked at the children playing in the yard, their laughter floating through the open window. They would have wanted this. Maria and Isabella. They would have wanted me to remember what it felt like to be human. Thomas came running back inside, breathless and excited. "Mr. Roberto, come see. We built a fort in the backyard." He let her drag him outside, this fierce 7-year-old who'd been brave enough to give him a drawing when she had nothing else to give, who'd looked at a man everyone feared and seen only someone who might help. As he sat in their makeshift fort, listening to the children's excited chatter, feeling the warmth of the afternoon sun, something occurred to him. He'd spent 32 years building an empire, accumulating power, making himself untouchable. But it took one desperate woman and 4 frozen children to remind him why any of it mattered. Power without purpose is just noise. Strength without compassion is just brutality. Protection without love is just a bigger cage. That night, as he drove home through streets no longer covered in snow, Gaucho Roberto made a decision. The empire would continue, the business would run, but alongside it, quietly, there would be something else. A fund, a foundation, a network of people watching for the next Anna Morrison, the next family about to freeze, the next landlord cutting corners, the next inspector taking bribes. He'd spent 30 decades being the thing people feared. Maybe it was time to also be the thing they hoped for.
Years later, when people in Huntsville talked about that blizzard, the worst in 50 years, they'd tell different versions of the story. Some said it was exaggerated. Some said the details got mixed up over time. Some said it probably didn't even happen that way. But Anna Morrison knew the truth. And so did her 4 children, who grew up knowing that on the coldest night of their lives, when every door had closed and hope had frozen solid, a man who'd forgotten how to feel had remembered just in time. Thomas kept all 3 drawings in a frame on her wall. The first one, 5 stick figures before everything got cold. The second one, 6 stick figures with the tall protector added. And the third one, the detailed drawing of their house, their family, their new life. She'd go on to become a social worker, dedicating her life to helping families in crisis. When people asked why she chose that path, she'd tell them about a blizzard night in 1987, about a drawing on cardboard, about a man who built walls so high he forgot there was sky above them, until 4 frozen children reminded him how to look up. Michael became a building inspector, the honest kind, the kind who didn't take bribes, the kind who shut down properties that put families at risk. He carried his father's memory in every inspection he signed. Sarah became a teacher in underprivileged neighborhoods, making sure every child had someone who cared whether they were warm, fed, safe. And Danny, the little boy who'd stopped crying that night because his body was shutting down, grew up to become a firefighter. He'd tell people it was because he wanted to be the kind of person who ran toward danger, not away from it. The kind who understood that sometimes saving one family means saving yourself. As for Gaucho Roberto, he continued running his empire. The businesses didn't stop, the meetings still happened, the deals still closed, but something fundamental had shifted. He established the Morrison Family Foundation, named after David Morrison, the man who'd tried 17 times to get a broken heater fixed. It operated quietly, without fanfare, no press releases, no ribbon cuttings, just results. Families on the edge got help before they fell over. Landlords who cut corners found themselves facing consequences that actually mattered. Inspectors who took bribes discovered their careers ending swiftly. The foundation didn't advertise, it just worked, methodically, relentlessly, the way Gaucho did everything. Vincent noticed the change.
His boss was still ruthless in business, still commanded absolute loyalty, still made men nervous, but there was something else now. A purpose beyond power, a reason beyond revenge. "You're different," Vincent said one evening, years after that blizzard night. "Am I?" "You smile more, at least when those kids are around." Gaucho didn't deny it. He couldn't. Thomas was 16 now, fierce and brilliant, talking about law school. Michael was 14, already showing the kind of integrity his father had died trying to maintain. Sarah was 13, writing stories that made him laugh. And Danny, the little boy who'd stopped crying that night because his body was shutting down, grew up to become a firefighter. He'd tell people it understood that sometimes saving one family means saving yourself. 10 years after that blizzard night, Gaucho Roberto sat in the same restaurant, Romano's, at the same table. It was a Tuesday evening, another private dinner, but this time there were different guests. Anna and her 4 children sat with him. Thomas was 17 now, about to graduate high school with a full scholarship to Columbia. Michael had just been accepted into a building inspection apprenticeship program. Sarah had won a state writing competition. Danny was talking excitedly about trying out for the baseball team. They were thriving, all of them. The waiter brought out the 1961 Barolo, the same wine he'd been drinking that night. Gaucho poured a small amount into Thomas's glass. She was almost an adult now, old enough for certain things. "A toast," he said, raising his glass. "To what?" Thomas asked. "To the coldest night that led to the warmest life."
They clinked glasses, expensive crystal against cheap sentiment, the combination somehow perfect. Later, after the children had gone home with Anna, Vincent sat down across from Gaucho. "You know what people say about you now? I stopped caring what people say decades ago. They say you're getting soft, that you've lost your edge." Gaucho smiled, a real smile, not the calculated expression he showed enemies. "Let them think that. Let them test it. They'll discover I haven't lost anything. I've just added something." "What's that?" "A reason to use power that doesn't leave me empty." He looked at the drawing Thomas had given him that night, now professionally framed, hanging on the wall behind his usual table. 5 stick figures under a crooked roof, a family before everything got cold. Below it hung the second drawing, 6 stick figures, the protector added. He'd built an empire on the ashes of his old life, had spent 32 years making sure he'd never be helpless again, had constructed walls so high that nothing could hurt him. And then 4 frozen children and their desperate mother had walked through his door and reminded him of something he'd forgotten. Power that only protects itself isn't power at all. It's just fear in an expensive suit. True power is choosing to be vulnerable enough to care, strong enough to protect, human enough to remember what you're protecting and why. That night, as snow began to fall again, gentle this time, not attacking, Gaucho Roberto looked out the window of Romano's and thought about the 2 families he'd loved. The one he'd lost in fire and smoke and bureaucratic indifference, and the one he'd found on the coldest night when a desperate woman gambled everything on the mercy of a man who'd forgotten he had any. He hadn't saved them, they'd saved him. Reminded him that beneath the empire, beneath the reputation, beneath 3 decades of carefully constructed armor, there was still Roberto Hernandez, still a father who'd once carried his daughter on his shoulders and told her stories about ships going to faraway places. Still a man who understood that the most powerful thing you can do isn't crushing your enemies, it's choosing to be the help that never came. The snow continued to fall, soft and steady, covering Huntsville in white,
But this time, Gaucho Roberto knew that somewhere in this city there was a house with warm lights in the windows, a mother who no longer had to choose between electricity and rent, 4 children who'd never have to wonder if they'd survive the night, and a family who'd taught a man who'd forgotten how to feel that the walls we build to protect ourselves often become the prisons we die in, unless we're brave enough or desperate enough to let someone knock them down. He finished his wine, set down the glass, and stood. Time to go home, time to rest, time to prepare for tomorrow when the Empire would demand his attention again. But first, he'd stop by the Morrison house, just to check in, just to make sure the heat was working properly, just to remind himself why any of it mattered. Because 32 years ago, nobody checked on him. Nobody made sure his family was warm. Nobody cared enough to be the difference between tragedy and survival. But tonight, and every night after, someone would. And that someone, that powerful, feared, untouchable man who'd built an empire on blood and determination, would make sure no family in his city ever froze when help was just a door away. The blizzard had ended years ago, but the warmth it created still remained.